Thank you everyone for watching the channel. Thank you everyone for your support. I'm very grateful for everything that is happening in my life, where I am. I realized this past week meditating how we think that life is not in order and every random event happens just out of control, but it's not the case. I realized this. Why? Because as I keep picking every book that I want to talk about, I noticed that while I was learning, I was picking the book that I needed to get me to the next step. And I'm realizing this now that I decided to make these videos. So your life with your events are not in a mistake. Things don't happen by accident. Pay attention to the signs that you're receiving from the universe because they're guiding you for your next step. In this video, after I discovered Buddhism and I decided to follow this path, that brought me to the next book, which is What the Buddha Taught. This book is amazing. What is the book about? This week, I was meditating on what to call this book, what to call this video. And what the Buddha taught is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And what I realized this week as well, as I was meditating, because I was thinking about the name for the video, I realized, and I'm going to claim it now, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Paths are the laws of the universe. Why do I say this? Because as I follow these four laws and the Eightfold Paths, is what changed my behavior from inside. What made me look inside, but also changed my perspective of life by just obeying those laws. Thank you all for watching. My name is Willie. I hope that you are really seeking within yourself how to become a better human being, because there's no one coming to save us. And the answer lies inside each one of us. It is us that have to take the courage to look inside. I hope you all enjoy these podcast videos that I created according to the studies of Buddhism, spirituality, and psychology. I thank you all for watching. If you have any comments, any suggestions, anything, please feel free to share them in the comments section. Thank you all. I'll see you in the next one.
All right, so you're with us again for another deep dive, and today we're going right to the heart of some big ideas. We're gonna unpack the foundational principles of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path.
Okay.
And I think, for, someone who's like you listening, you're interested in getting knowledge quickly, but you also want it to be thorough.
Right.
This is going to be really valuable, I think.
Right.
It's like we're going to understand the, kind of like the operating system almost behind a lot of our experiences. And I think that's a really cool way to think about it. And today our mission is to make these core ideas, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, clear, concise, and really show you why they matter in navigating life.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's so fascinating about these ideas is that they're not just these, ancient philosophical ideas that are kind of gathering dust. They're actually incredibly practical. And they offer a way of understanding why we experience the world the way we do, and crucially a path towards, greater well-being. And the Buddha spent decades sharing these insights and refining them, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's jump right into the Four Noble Truths, starting with the first Noble Truth, which is Dukkha.
Okay.
Now, when you hear the word suffering, right, your first thought might be like intense pain or sadness.
Right.
But what our sources highlight is that it's actually a much broader concept.
Yeah.
It's more about like a fundamental unsatisfactoriness that's kind of woven into our experiences.
Right. Think of it less as, you're saying, less as like a constant state of misery, and more as an inherent kind of wobble or unease in our experience.
Yeah.
And the texts actually break this down into three kind of key aspects of experience.
Okay.
So the first one is the understanding that everything is impermanent.
Oh, yeah.
Think about that, new gadget that you were so excited about last year.
Yeah.
The thrill faded, right?
It always does.
Yeah, and so that's impermanence in action. But Buddhism isn't just saying that, things change. It's really highlighting that our attachment to this fleeting excitement, or pleasure is actually a core source of dissatisfaction.
Makes sense.
So that's the first aspect. Then you've got the second aspect, which is unsatisfactoriness, which arises precisely because of that impermanence.
Yeah.
The fact that, nothing that we cling to lasts, and that can lead to disappointment.
Yeah.
And then the third aspect, which we'll touch on, more later, is the idea of no self or anattā.
Okay.
Which also contributes to this sense of dukkha.
Got it. And then within this idea of dukkha itself, there are also like 3 kinds of suffering that we encounter, right? So you've got like ordinary suffering, which is like the physical pain and emotional distress that are just part of being human, right? We all experience that.
Yeah.
Then there's suffering due to change.
Yeah.
That feeling of loss when something good ends or is taken away.
Right.
And finally, this pervasive suffering, the inherent unsatisfactoriness of our conditioned existence. Like, what does that actually mean, for you in your day-to-day life?
So pervasive suffering, or dukkha, as kind of conditioned existence, stems from what are known as the 5 aggregates of attachment.
Okay, the 5 aggregates. Yeah.
Yeah, so think about your experience right now. You're seeing these words.
Yeah.
That's form. You might feel curious, listening, that sensation. You're recognizing the letters, you're forming them into words. That's perception.
Right.
You're forming thoughts about what I'm saying. These are mental formations, which include your intentions and even karma.
Right.
And then you're aware of all of this. That's consciousness.
Right.
So these 5 kind of constantly shifting streams of experience are what constitute a being in Buddhist thought.
Okay.
And what's fascinating here is that Buddhism doesn't posit this separate unchanging soul or self that exists independently of these processes.
Yeah.
It's all interconnected and it's all in flux.
So these aggregates are constantly changing. And because we tend to identify with them as me, that's where this underlying sense of unsatisfactoriness comes from.
Precisely. The Source uses this really relatable analogy.
Okay.
It says, think about a person whose company you enjoy.
Okay.
Right, so you experience pleasure when you're with them,
Right.
which is actually called asada in the texts.
Okay.
But this is impermanent.
Right.
And when that connection changes or ends, you might feel sadness or disappointment,
Yeah.
which is called adinava.
Oh, okay.
Right, so the freedom or detachment comes when you don't cling to that person or the enjoyable feeling that they bring.
Right.
So it highlights how our attachment to these ever-changing aggregates, whether it's a person or, any other experience,
Right.
can lead to potential suffering.
Oh, I see. So asada is that initial taste of pleasure.
Exactly.
And adinava is the shadow of potential disappointment that follows.
Yeah, it's like, the initial rush of buying something new versus that, inevitable wanting of the next new thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting that even though this first truth is about unsatisfactoriness, it's not meant to be like a completely bleak outlook.
Right.
Our sources even mention the Buddha was often described as ever smiling.
Right.
And Buddhist art frequently conveys the sense of calm and serene joy.
Absolutely. Understanding dukkha isn't about wallowing in negativity. It's actually the first step towards a realistic and honest look at our experience.
Right.
And the point isn't to become impatient or angry at suffering,
Yeah.
but to understand its underlying causes and how we can potentially move beyond it.
Yeah.
And as the texts point out, even joy, or piti, as it's called,
Okay.
can actually be a stepping stone on the path to a deeper understanding.
So it's not like you have to get rid of all pleasant experiences.
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right, so we've acknowledged this fundamental unsatisfactoriness.
Okay.
What comes next? So that leads us to the second noble truth of Samudaya, the arising of dukkha.
Okay.
What's the core insight here for you?
So the core of the second noble truth is tanhā,
Okay.
often translated as thirst or craving or desire.
Yeah.
And this is identified as the root cause of dukkha
Yeah.
and the driving force behind the cycle of continuity, what's known as samsara.
Okay.
It's not just, wanting a new car.
Yeah.
It's the underlying desire for that car to make you feel permanently happy or secure,
Oh, yeah.
which is an unsustainable expectation.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of clinging to those desires.
So this thirst isn't just for material possessions, is it?
No, it's much broader than that. It includes the desire to be and to become,
Yeah.
accompanied by passions and defilements and impurities.
Right.
Think about the desire for recognition,
Yeah.
the longing for a different state of being.
Mm-hmm.
Even the aversion to unpleasant experiences, these are all forms of tanhā. And the text also briefly touches on karma here,
Okay.
which are volitional actions that arise from our mental formations. And these actions, fueled by tanhā, play a significant role in perpetuating the cycle of dukkha.
So as long as this underlying craving persists, the cycle of unsatisfactoriness just keeps going?
Exactly. The texts are very clear that this cycle only stops when this thirst is cut off through wisdom,
Yeah.
through a clear and profound understanding of reality,
I see.
which naturally leads us to the third noble truth, Nirodha,
Yeah.
the cessation of dukkha.
So Nirodha, the idea that suffering can actually cease.
Yes.
Like, that's a pretty hopeful message, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And the cessation is what's known as nirvana, right?
Yes. Nirvana is emancipation, liberation,
Yeah.
freedom from suffering,
Yeah.
and the ongoing cycle of dukkha.
Right.
And it's described as the cessation of that very thirst that we just discussed,
Okay.
tanhā.
Tanhā, got it.
And the text offered this range of positive terms to describe nirvana. Things like auspicious safety, peace, absolute truth, ultimate reality.
It's interesting that while nirvana is often described using like negative terms like the cessation of craving,
Right.
the texts emphasize that it's not inherently a negative state.
Precisely, it's vital to understand nirvana as the absolute truth in Buddhism.
Bro.
And
That's
what is
deep.
that absolute truth?
Yeah, what is it?
It's the profound realization that there is nothing absolute in the conventional world we experience.
Wow.
Everything is relative, everything is conditioned, everything is constantly changing, and without a fixed, unchanging self or anattā.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So in a way, nirvana as absolute truth is the direct understanding that there's no ultimate permanent reality to grasp onto.
I see. So instead of just stating it's not negative, we could contrast it with, the idea of a heavenly afterlife,
Right,
really highlighting the focus on like present moment liberation
exactly.
through this understanding. Okay.
Yeah,
The texts even mention the Mahayana view, where nirvana isn't seen as something fundamentally different from samsara,
right.
our everyday cycle of experience. Depending on your perspective, that sounds like a real shift in how you might see things.
It is a nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
The idea is that the difference isn't in the reality itself,
Yeah.
but in how we perceive it.
I see.
So from a place of ignorance and craving, we experience samsara
Yeah.
and its inherent unsatisfactoriness.
Yeah.
From a place of wisdom and detachment,
Yeah.
the same reality is experienced as nirvana.
Wow.
It's really about a fundamental shift in your understanding.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. And what about that question that often comes up, what happens after nirvana?
Right.
The texts seem quite direct on this.
They're very clear.
Yeah.
So since nirvana is understood as the ultimate truth,
Right.
the question of what comes after doesn't really follow logically.
Yeah, I guess not.
Right? If there were something after, then that would be the ultimate truth, not nirvana.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right. So the texts also touch on what happens to an arahant,
Okay.
someone who has fully realized nirvana in this lifetime
Right.
after their death, which is called parinirvana.
Okay.
And this is often considered one of the unanswered questions
I see.
because it's beyond our conventional understanding.
Yeah, like it's not something we can really grasp with our normal minds.
Exactly. And the texts use this analogy
Okay.
of a fire going out when the fuel is exhausted.
Oh, yeah, that really clicks.
Right.
It helps visualize the cessation of the fuel of craving.
Exactly.
Okay.
But it's crucial to understand that it's the being composed of those 5 aggregates we discussed earlier.
Right.
That ceases, not nirvana itself.
Okay.
Nirvana is that underlying truth that was realized.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The texts also address this question of, who realizes nirvana if there's no permanent self?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, and they point out that it's the wisdom itself, the direct realization that achieves this understanding.
Yeah.
There's no separate self behind it, acting as the knower.
Okay.
It's the wisdom itself.
So it's like wisdom realizing itself almost?
In a way, yes.
Okay, so we've established that unsatisfactoriness exists. It has a root cause in craving,
Right.
and it is possible for it to cease. That naturally leads us to the fourth noble truth, Magga, the path.
Yes.
And this path, as you likely know, is the well-known middle path or Noble Eightfold Path.
Exactly.
And this is the practical how-to guide for getting there.
That's right. This is the roadmap. This is the way,
Yeah,
leading to the cessation of dukkha and the realization of nirvana.
right.
And, the Buddha dedicated the vast majority of his teachings, those 45 years,
Wow.
to explaining this path in countless ways, tailoring his message to, different people's understanding.
Right, yeah.
And the texts consistently highlight the crucial role of both compassion and wisdom
Yeah.
as the foundation of this path. It's not just about, understanding, it's also about embodying that understanding in a compassionate way.
And this eightfold path is typically structured into three main categories to kind of make it easier to grasp, right?
Yeah.
So ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom.
Right.
So let's start with wisdom.
Okay.
So within wisdom, which is Paññā,
Yes.
we find two essential elements. First, there's right understanding,
Yes.
Samādhi.
Samādhi.
And this isn't just intellectual agreement.
Right.
It involves like a deep experiential understanding of the Four Noble Truths themselves,
Exactly.
as well as the fundamental nature of reality.
Yeah.
Impermanence, Dukkha, and Anattā.
No self.
Right, no self. So it all comes back to that foundational understanding we've been discussing.
Yeah, it's like the ground on which everything else is built.
Right, it's not just knowing the facts.
Right.
It's really grasping their implications for how you live.
Yeah, for how you experience the world.
Right. And the second aspect of wisdom is right thought. Samasankappa.
Samsankappa.
Yeah.
So right thought refers to cultivating thoughts of selfless renunciation or detachment, thoughts rooted in loving kindness,
Yeah.
and thoughts of nonviolence and compassion towards all beings. What's particularly insightful here is that the texts emphasize that these noble thoughts are inherently aligned with wisdom.
Yeah.
So this suggests that selfish desires, ill will, and violence
Right.
ultimately stem from a lack of true understanding about the nature of reality
Precisely.
and our interconnectedness.
Yeah, it's like when you see through the illusion of separateness,
Yeah,
then those kinds of harmful thoughts and intentions naturally start to fade away.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you truly understand the nature of suffering, you're less likely to inflict it on yourself or others.
Exactly.
So moving on to ethical conduct.
Okay.
Sīla.
Sīla, yeah.
This seems more directly focused on our outward behavior.
It is. It's about how we act in the world.
Yeah.
And it begins with right speech, samavako.
Which means consciously abstaining from harmful forms of communication,
Yeah.
such as lying, slander, harsh or abusive language,
Right.
and idle gossip.
Yeah, it's really being mindful of the impact of our words.
Absolutely. Our words have power.
Yeah, they do, they do. Then there's right action,
Samakamanta.
samakamanta.
Which involves abstaining from actions that cause harm,
Right.
specifically killing or harming living beings,
Yeah.
stealing or taking what is not freely given, and sexual misconduct that violates boundaries and causes suffering.
Right.
The texts even mention these specific 4 vices of conduct that someone on this path is actively working to eliminate.
Oh, okay.
So it's not just about avoiding those actions.
Right.
It's about actively cultivating their opposites.
I see. Okay, and finally under ethical conduct, we have right livelihood.
Samajiva.
Samājiva. What does that look like in practice for you, our listener, in the modern world?
So livelihood means earning your living in a way that doesn't cause harm or exploit others.
Yeah.
And historically, this included avoiding trades in things like weapons,
Right.
the trafficking of living beings, the production or sale of intoxicants,
Yeah.
dealing in poisons.
So basically anything that causes harm or suffering.
Yeah, in today's context, you might think about whether your profession or the companies you support, contribute to harm or injustice in some way.
Yeah. It's really about aligning your work and how you make a living with your ethical principles.
Exactly. It's about bringing that ethical awareness into every area of your life.
Okay, so we've covered how wisdom guides our understanding and thought,
Right.
and how ethics guides our actions and livelihood.
Yep.
Now we move into mental discipline,
Okay.
Samādhi,
Samādhi.
which sounds like it focuses on training the mind itself.
It does. It's about cultivating a different kind of relationship with your own mind.
Yeah, okay.
So the first element here is right effort,
Okay.
samavayama.
Samavayama.
And this is that energetic and intentional effort to prevent unwholesome mental states from arising in the first place,
Okay.
to actively eliminate those that have already arisen, to cultivate wholesome and beneficial mental states, and to nurture and bring to perfection those good states that are already present.
Wow.
It's really about taking responsibility for the direction of your mind.
That sounds like it requires a lot of consistent attention.
It does. It's a practice.
Yeah.
And it's something that you develop over time.
Which leads us directly to, mindfulness?
Samadhi.
Samadhi.
Yeah.
For someone just starting out, what does this practically involve?
So, mindfulness is about cultivating a continuous awareness of the present moment.
Yeah.
You're paying diligent attention to the activities of your body,
Okay.
like your breath or walking,
Right.
your sensations and feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, the activities of your mind, your thoughts and emotions,
Yeah.
and your ideas, thoughts, and conceptions, which are called dhammas in the texts. And the Satipatthana Sutta, which you might think of as the Buddha's detailed user manual for training your attention,
Okay.
elaborates on these 4 areas of focus.
Okay.
And simple practices like, paying attention to your breath as it goes in and out,
Right.
which is called anapanasati,
Okay.
or simply being aware of what you're doing as you go about your daily activities like washing dishes or walking,
Right.
are key examples.
Yeah.
It's really about bringing your awareness to the here and now without judgment.
Yeah, just observing.
Observing, exactly.
Okay.
And the final element of the Eightfold Path is right concentration,
Okay.
Samādhi.
Samādhi.
And when we hear concentration, we might think of, intense focus. But what does it entail in this context?
Yeah, what does it actually mean?
So,
Right.
concentration involves developing these deep states of mental focus and absorption, which traditionally lead to these 4 stages of dhyana, often translated as trance or meditative absorption. And in these progressive stages, distractions and unwholesome thoughts are gradually quieted, and states of joy, equanimity, and deep peace are cultivated.
Wow.
It's really a deepening of your ability to focus your mind in a way that leads to profound inner stillness and insight.
So it's not just focusing on a task.
No, it's more about cultivating a quality of attention
Right.
that allows for these deeper states of awareness to emerge.
Okay, and it's crucial to remember, as our sources emphasize, that this entire Eightfold Path isn't a set of sequential steps that you complete one after the other. It's more like a wheel,
Exactly.
where all of the aspects are interconnected
Mhm.
and need to be developed in a balanced and integrated way.
Yeah, you can't really isolate one element from the others.
Right.
They all support and reinforce each other.
Yeah. Okay, and to bring it full circle back to the 4 Noble Truths,
Right.
the texts outline 4 key functions that we need to engage in regarding them.
Okay.
First, fully understanding dukkha. Second, letting go of and discarding the arising of dukkha, that craving tanhā.
Yes.
Third, directly realizing the cessation of dukkha,
Nirvana.
And fourth, consistently following and cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path.
Right. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah, it is. It is. So to bring it all together, we've taken a really insightful journey, I think, into these foundational principles of Buddhism.
Absolutely.
The 4 Noble Truths,
Yeah.
which illuminate the reality of unsatisfactoriness, its origin in craving the possibility of its cessation in nirvana,
Right.
and the practical path to that cessation through the Noble Eightfold Path, encompassing wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline.
Yeah, it's a profound framework for understanding and transforming our experience.
It is. And it's so important for you, our listener, to remember, as our source material underscores, that this is ultimately a path of personal responsibility and cultivation.
Right.
The Buddha, through his own journey, discovered and clearly showed the way.
Yeah, he pointed the way.
But ultimately, each individual must walk that path and do the inner work themselves.
Exactly. It's not a spectator sport.
Yeah, you got to get in there and do it.
Yeah.
Hopefully through this deep dive, you've gained some valuable knowledge and maybe even a few of those aha moments.
Yeah, I hope so.
As we've explored these ancient yet incredibly relevant teachings.
Yes, they really are timeless.
They are.
And universally applicable.
Yeah, and it's a framework that really invites you to look at your own experiences and challenges through a fresh and potentially liberating lens.
Exactly. It's an invitation to see things differently.
Yeah.
To see things as they really are.
Right.
And that seeing can be incredibly freeing.
It can.
It can be liberating.
It can be. So this raises a really important question for you to consider as you go about your day.
Okay.
How might applying even small aspects of the Eightfold Path, perhaps bringing a bit more mindful attention to your interactions, or making a more conscious effort towards ethical communication in your relationships or at work, subtly but significantly shift your perspective on daily difficulties
Right.
and contribute to a greater and more lasting sense of well-being?
That's the real invitation here, to experiment.
Yeah.
To see how these principles can actually make a difference in your life.
Yeah, to actually put them into practice.
Exactly.
See what happens.
See what happens. And we really encourage you to continue exploring these profound teachings.
Yes.
And see what resonates most deeply for you in your own life.
Yeah, it's a journey of discovery.
It is.
And we're all on it together.
Yeah.